Over a 76-day period in 2017, attackers infiltrated Equifax and extracted the core identity data of 147 million Americans. They walked away with a database containing names, dates of birth, and social security numbers for nearly half the adult U.S. population. The fallout cost the company an estimated $1.38 billion in settlements, remediation, and legal fees. 3 C-suite executives were forced out, and a former chief information officer faced a criminal conviction. To execute an operation of this scale, the attackers did not develop a complex zero-day exploit. They didn't deploy advanced custom malware. Instead, they leveraged CVE 2017-5638. This was a publicly documented vulnerability in a web framework, and the vendor had released a software patch for it more than 2 months before the attackers ever entered the Equifax network. The attackers didn't need ingenuity, they just needed time.
To understand how a public disclosure turned into a billion-dollar breach, we have to look at the specific technical layers that were supposed to stop them and why every single one was silent. Equifax is a primary consumer credit reporting agency. They hold the foundational identity data for hundreds of millions of people: names, dates of birth, and social security numbers. This specific combination of data allows a threat actor to impersonate a victim across the entire financial system. To build their internal and external web applications, Equifax relied heavily on Apache Struts 2, a ubiquitous open-source Java framework used by thousands of enterprises. On March 7, 2017, the Apache Software Foundation publicly disclosed a severe vulnerability in this framework and released a patch the very same day. Equifax's security team ran internal network scans to find any systems running the vulnerable framework. However, their scans missed a specific public-facing application known as the Consumer Dispute Portal. Because the portal was missed, it remained unpatched. 3 days later, on March 10th, attackers located the exposed portal and initiated the breach. This diagram shows the critical gap. Relying solely on scheduled vulnerability scans creates an unpatched blind spot. If an organization lacks an accurate inventory mapping specific software components to specific servers, they cannot patch those systems in time. The software flaw resided within the Jakarta multi-part parser, a component of Apache Struts designed to process HTTP file upload requests. Looking at this diagram, we see how the exploit begins. The attacker sends an HTTP request to the server, but they intentionally insert a malformed text string into the content type header. When the parser reads this invalid MIME type, it operates exactly as intended. It fails to process the file and generates an error message containing the invalid text. But here is the fatal flaw in the framework's logic. Instead of treating that invalid header as a plain text string to log and discard, the framework evaluates it. It evaluates the text using the Object Graph Navigation Library, or OGNL. OGNL is a powerful expression language in Java that has the authority to call internal methods and access system resources. It is like handing a receptionist a note that says, "Read this aloud," and the words on the paper happen to be a pre-programmed voice command that disables the building's security system. By embedding malicious OGNL expressions inside the content type header, the attacker achieves unauthenticated remote code execution. They gain full control of the server without needing a username or a password. Any unsanitized input, in a string destined for a routine error log, provides an attacker with a highly privileged execution pathway. Gaining control of a public-facing web server is a severe compromise, but it does not explain how the attackers reached 147 million records stored deep within the corporate network. This top-down map illustrates the first major architectural failure. The red dot represents the compromised perimeter web server. Because Equifax operated a flat internal network, there were no microsegmentation firewalls separating the edge from the core. The compromised web server had direct access to the deepest internal databases. Once inside, the attackers discovered clear text credentials stored directly on the compromised servers. 35 different system administrators were using a single unencrypted sign-on credential to manage legacy internal data systems. The attackers picked up this plaintext key and began pivoting. They used it to sequentially unlock and access 51 separate internal databases. They did not pull everything at once. Over the following weeks, they methodically executed approximately 9,000 discrete database queries, extracting sensitive records in small batches. A hard perimeter wrapped around a soft, unsegmented interior guarantees that a single vulnerable application will eventually compromise the entire enterprise. 9,000 bulk database queries and the exfiltration of millions of records generate massive amounts of network traffic. The obvious question is why the Security Operations Center received 0 alarms. This diagram shows that Equifax actually had the correct tools installed. They deployed a network traffic inspection device, essentially a man-in-the-middle proxy that decrypts and re-encrypts packets, inspecting internal traffic for malware and data theft. To evade this exact tool, the attackers encrypted the data they were stealing. On the wire, it appeared as standard, secure HTTPS traffic. The inspection device required a digital TLS certificate to decrypt and read that traffic. But 10 months prior, in January 2017, that specific certificate had expired. When the certificate lapsed, the security appliance failed open. Rather than blocking the encrypted traffic it could no longer inspect, it silently passed it through to the internet. For 76 days, the network monitoring tools saw nothing but routine web traffic. The attackers operated within blind spots of the company's own making. Procuring and installing a security tool means nothing if its underlying dependencies, like certificate life cycles, are not strictly validated and maintained. In late July, the security team finally noticed anomalous network activity and severed the access. Equifax publicly disclosed the breach in September 2017. Following the disclosure, a congressional investigation published a 96-page report concluding that the breach was entirely preventable. The failure of these internal controls resulted in the forced resignations of Equifax's CEO, Chief Information Officer, and Chief Security Officer. The company eventually agreed to a $700 million settlement with the FTC, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, and 50 U.S. states and territories. Allowing technical debt to accumulate, whether it is an expired security certificate or an unpatched legacy server, translates directly into existential legal and organizational crises. Preventing this scale of compromise requires moving past macro-level policies and enforcing strict micro-level controls inside the development cycle. First, enforce strict service-level agreements for critical patches and enable software composition analysis, or SCA, in your CI/CD pipelines. This automatically flags vulnerable dependencies before they reach production. Second, eliminate plaintext credentials entirely. Integrate automated secret scanners into your code repositories as pre-commit hooks to catch active keys before deployment. Third, generate a software bill of materials for all applications. When a critical CVE drops, you need the capability to query your codebase in seconds, not days. The Equifax breach demonstrates that high-end security tools are secondary to the rigorous, consistent maintenance of the code and the network architecture they are meant to protect.